All right, thank you for joining us for How Shazam Can Help You Predict Hits. My name is Matt Bailey, and I am the president of Integrate Research. Our presentation today is going to take about 30 minutes, and if you have questions, type them in, and my colleague Katie will be gathering those questions throughout the webinar, and we'll take some time at the end to answer as many of them as we can. Quick note, if you're asking, who's Integrate Research? I haven't heard of you guys before. Well, our company is new. We were just founded this year, but we have a long track record of helping radio stations pick the right new music. Our core product, Integrate New Music Research, was launched back in 2013 as a 21st century update to call-out research. That was launched when we were a part of Coleman Insights, and we actually trace our heritage all the way back to core call-out, which got started in the mid-1980s doing call-out research among highly focused radio listening samples. So the company's new, but we have a long heritage of helping radio pick the best new music. And today we're going to take a look at how you can use Shazam to predict new hits. A lot of you are using Shazam to help you get an early read on new hits, and the Shazam app for the iPhone launched in 2008, which is when it really started catching on. It actually predated the iPhone. It was originally a service you could use on your old-fashioned cell phone, but once it gained traction as an iPhone app, radio programmers were really quick to realize that they could use Shazam's data to spot which songs were catching listeners' attention early on and ultimately predict which songs are going to be hits. And today there are a variety of ways that you can access Shazam's data. You can go to Shazam's website where they publish charts both for the whole world and for the United States. You can have Shazam email you that information every Tuesday for the world and the U.S. and some of the major markets in the U.S. Mediabase, as of a couple months ago, added Shazam data for their subscribers for specific local markets. And the way a lot of programmers do it is they simply use the Near Me feature on the Shazam app that everybody has access to see which songs listeners in their area are Shazamming. So even though a lot of people are using Shazam, and even though anecdotally we have a sense that Shazam is kind of the hit predicting oracle we've always wanted in radio, there's some questions about how well it does that, how well it predicts hits, that nobody has answered yet. So we decided it was time for us to do it. And here's some of the questions that we're going to answer for you today. How many songs that are big on Shazam become big hits for radio? How early does Shazam spot those big hits? A former executive with Shazam a few years ago bragged that Shazam could pick songs that were going to be big hits for record companies months before any other metric could spot them. Some folks may or may not be aware that Shazam actually sells more detailed information to record companies about the data it collects from its users. So how accurate is it that it's months ahead of other metrics? Is Shazam better at spotting the hit potential of certain types of songs more than other types? And on the other side of it, does Shazam miss certain types of songs that become big hits for radio? And the final question we're going to answer today is, are there big songs on Shazam that never become big hits for radio? In other words, are there cases where Shazam can lead you astray? Now, to answer that question, here's what we examined. We examined the top 10 most Shazammed songs in the U.S. each week from January 13th, 2015 through February 1st, 2016. So we looked at a little bit more than a year's worth of data for the top 10 most Shazammed songs. And we compared those top 10 most Shazammed songs to the top 10 songs on the Billboard Hot 100 chart during the corresponding weeks. And when we talk about how old songs are throughout this presentation, it's important to note that we calibrated the vintage for each song based on when each song first entered the Billboard Hot 100, not the record company's release date. Now, we're not talking about when it entered the Billboard Hot 100's top 10. As long as it entered at number 99, that's when we counted it as week 1. And the reason we use that for our vintage for songs and not the record company's release date is because we wanted to track when a song first entered the public consciousness, regardless of how it became big, and not when the record company released it. Because, as you know, a song could be the third or fourth hit from a single, third or fourth single from an album, and nobody notices that third or fourth single until months after the album itself was released. So that's how we're calibrating vintage. Why did we use the Billboard Hot 100 instead of, for example, our own research or media-based information about radio airplay to determine hits? Well, we used it because the venerable Hot 100 chart captures every possible way that listeners today can consume music. It captures which songs are big on the radio through the radio songs chart, which monitors the songs you're playing most. It captures streaming songs, the songs that listeners are watching the videos and listening to the songs on Spotify and YouTube. And it also captures which songs people are buying through the digital songs chart, which captures paid single downloads on services such as iTunes. So that's why we're using the Hot 100 chart for our comparison. The first question we want to look at is how many songs that are big on Shazam also become big hits for radio? How effective is Shazam at picking the songs that are going to be big hits for us tomorrow? Well, it's quite impressive, actually. Of the top 10 songs on Shazam at any given point, 73% of them will ultimately go on to also become top 10 hits on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Later on, we're going to look at the 27% that don't, but for the bulk of this presentation, we're going to focus on those 73% of songs that went top 10 on Shazam that also went top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. So our next question is, well, okay, so there's a lot of overlap. How early does Shazam spot those big hits? Is it really giving us a lead in months or weeks or only days? Well, to answer that question, we first have to take a look at how old hit songs typically are. How long does it take a song once people first get to know it for it to work its way up to the top 10, and how long does it stay on the top 10 before people move on to something else? So what I'm about to show you is the vintage distribution on average of the top 10 songs on the Billboard Hot 100 on any given week. And that's what you're looking at here. And what this tells us is that the average top 10 song on the Hot 100 chart is a little over 16 weeks old. Now remember, that Hot 100 chart is being comprised of the songs that are getting played most on the radio, as well as the songs that are being streamed most on services like YouTube and Spotify, which have very similar distribution curves. In other words, the songs that are biggest on radio and the songs that are biggest on streaming are both, the majority of them, between 9 and 20 weeks old. However, music sales look slightly different because that's front-loaded. The majority of songs that are the top-selling singles on iTunes are generally between 1 and 12 weeks old. So just showing you this information briefly to show you where the Hot 100 chart is coming from that we're going to use to compare to Shazam. If you really want to go deep into this information, back when we were a part of Coleman Insights, we took a deep dive look at this in a presentation called When is a Hit that I believe is still available over on Coleman Insights websites. But let's get back to Shazam now. So that's where the Hot 100 comes from, and the average song is 16.1 weeks old. That's in its top 10. How does that compare to the top 10 hits on Shazam? Well, the vintage of the top 10 hits on Shazam, the average top 10 song on Shazam is 12.9 weeks old. So Shazam is indeed earlier than the Hot 100 chart, which gives us a sign that, yes, it is showing promise at predicting new hits. But remember, the distribution of the songs that are in the top 10, in other words, how old they are, is dependent on two factors. It's dependent on how quickly listeners catch on to those songs and that they move their way up to the top 10. And it also depends on how long they stay in the top 10 before they ultimately fall out of the top 10. I want to take a quick look at how long it takes songs to fall out of the top 10 on Shazam versus the top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100 chart. This is the distribution of how long it takes songs to fall off of Shazam's top 10 once they've reached the top 10. 60% of those songs fall out of Shazam's top 10 between 9 and 20 weeks. And that's important because that's about the same length of time that the majority of the typical song that's big on radio and big on streaming is. Whereas for the Hot 100, top 10 songs typically end their top 10 run, 54% of them, fall out of the Hot 100's top 10 between 17 and 28 weeks. So songs are falling out of Shazam's top 10 faster than they're falling out of the Billboard Hot 100's top 10. Does that mean that songs that last on Shazam longer are staying hits longer? Well, let's take a look at that. First, let's take a look at the songs that stayed on the Hot 100's top 10 the longest during the time frame we looked at. Those are some pretty big hits. Songs like Fetty Wap's Trap Queen Ed Sheeran's Thinking Out Loud, Uptown Funk, Stitches, Shut Up and Dance. Those are some pretty big hits. Now let's take a look at the songs that stayed top 10 on Shazam the longest. Those are songs like Elle King's X's and O's, Major Lazer's Lean On, Where Are You Now, Here, Take Me to Church. And these were some pretty big songs, but how do they compare to the songs that fell out of Shazam's top 10 really super early? Those songs that by 9 to 12 weeks were gone for Shazam's top 10. Well, those are actually some of the biggest hits of 2015 and early 2016. Songs like Taylor Swift's Bad Blood, Justin Bieber's Sorry, Adele's Hello, Taylor Swift's Blank Space, Maroon 5 Sugar. These were some of the biggest hits of this period, and yet they fell out of the Shazam top 10 fairly quickly. Well, you might ask, why is that? Why did people stop Shazamming them? Well, remember, the reason people Shazam songs is to learn the artist and title of songs that intrigue them, where they don't know that information. So it makes sense when you think about these big songs by big name artists that people are going to figure out pretty quickly that it's a Taylor Swift song, and people are going to figure out pretty quickly that the name of Justin Bieber's hit is Sorry. So the worst possible way you could use Shazam information, the worst way to use it as a programmer would be to take the Shazam top 10 chart and make that your playlist. And the reason is because just as songs are falling out of Shazam's top 10 in many cases are when your listeners are most interested in hearing them. So what we instead want to look at, instead of how long songs are staying in Shazam's top 10, is how quickly do songs become top 10 on Shazam? Well, there again, Shazam is earlier than the Hot 100. 63% of songs reach Shazam's top 10 between 1 and 8 weeks, in comparison to the Hot 100 chart's top 10, where 62% of songs reach the Hot 100's top 10 from 5 to 20 weeks. Now, the real question we want to answer, though, is how does that look for individual songs? In other words, when we do a song-by-song comparison, how quickly does a song reach Shazam's top 10 before it becomes a top 10 hit on the charts? Well, it varies a lot. For 10% of songs, Shazam is 7 weeks or more early at predicting that that song will become a top 10 hit on the Hot 100 chart. 13% of songs are 5 to 6 weeks early on Shazam, and another 10% of songs are 3 to 4 weeks early on Shazam. So 33% of songs are significantly early at reaching Shazam's top 10. For another 23% of songs, Shazam is early, but not as early, between 1 and 2 weeks. So for 23% of songs, we can say that Shazam is a little bit early. Another 26% of songs reach Shazam's top 10 the exact same week they reach the Billboard Hot 100 chart's top 10. And for 18% of songs, they're actually late reaching Shazam's top 10. So for 44% of songs, we can say that Shazam is actually not early at predicting that that song is going to be a top 10 hit. So let's take a look at those songs that Shazam is good at predicting are going to be hits. Those 33% of songs that Shazam is significantly early at predicting that they're going to be top 10 hits. What are those songs? And is Shazam better at spotting the hit potential of certain types of songs more than other types of songs? Well, what I'm about to show you are those songs during 2015 and early 2016 that Shazam spotted at least 4 weeks early. And what I'm going to compare that to is the green bars on your screen will show you how many weeks it took those songs to become top 10 hits on the Billboard Hot 100 chart versus the blue bars that will show you how long it took each song to become a top 10 hit on Shazam. So just to explain what you're looking at here, if you take a song like 21 Pilots Stressed Out, it took 12 weeks to go top 10 on Shazam. It took 16 weeks to go top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. So Shazam was 4 weeks early at predicting that Stressed Out would be a top 10 hit. Down at the bottom of your screen, you look at Ed Sheeran's Photograph. It took 9 weeks to go top 10 on Shazam, 18 weeks to go top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. So you can say that Shazam was 9 weeks early at predicting that Photograph would be a top 10 hit. Now, what do these songs have in common? When we analyzed them, we found that there's 3 different types of songs that Shazam has a track record of predicting will be hits early. The first batch are songs like Jason Derulo's Want to Want Me, David Guetta and Nicki Minaj's Hey Mama, the Chainsmokers' Roses, Lean On, and Where Are You Now. These you'll recognize as EDM and dance tracks. And if you think about why people Shazam a song to learn the artist and title, it makes sense why EDM and dance tracks would get a lot of traction on Shazam. When the DJ is the artist and not a vocalist, you might not necessarily automatically know who the artist is because you can't recognize it from the vocalist. Shazam is really good at spotting when these EDM and dance tracks have mainstream CHR appeal. The second batch of songs are songs like Pitbull and Neo's Time of Our Lives, Somebody, and Here. These aren't dance tracks or anything, but they're songs that are sonically a little bit outside of the mainstream CHR's middle pop sound. So these are another batch of songs that Shazam is really good at predicting will be hits early. And the final category of songs that Shazam has a proven track record of predicting will be hits early are songs like 21 Pilots' Stressed Out, Elle King X's and O's, and Ed Sheeran's Photograph. These are crossover songs, songs that started their life in specific formats, such as alternative or hot AC, and Shazam was effective at spotting that these songs piqued listeners' interest beyond the niche formats that they started off in. So that's 3 batches of songs that Shazam is good at predicting will be hits early. What about the other side of the equation? What about those songs that were top 10 on Shazam and top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, but that Shazam didn't spot early, or maybe was even late at spotting? What are those songs, and does Shazam miss certain types of songs that become big hits for radio? Well, now we're going to show you the songs that Shazam didn't spot earlier, some of the ones that actually went top 10 late on Shazam. So again, to show you what you're looking at, the green bars are showing you how many weeks it took for the song to reach the Hot 100 charts top 10, whereas the blue bars are showing you how long it took each song to reach Shazam's top 10. So for Justin Bieber's Love Yourself, it went top 10 super fast in its very first week, but it took 5 weeks to work its way up to Shazam's top 10. So Shazam was actually 4 weeks late predicting that that song would be a top 10 hit. Whereas for songs like Fetty Wap's Trap Queen and The Weeknd's Earned It, those songs reached the top 10 for Shazam the same week they reached the top 10 for the Hot 100 chart. So Shazam just wasn't early, but it wasn't late on those songs. Well, what do these songs all have in common? Well, there's 2 different types of songs that Shazam does not spot early. The first batch of songs are songs like Justin Bieber's Love Yourself, Maroon 5's Sugar, Ellie Goulding's Love Me Like You Do, Taylor Swift's Bad Blood, Rachel Platten's Fight Song, and Walk the Moon, Shut Up and Dance. These are mainstream pop songs by really big name artists. And if you think again about why people Shazam a song, it makes sense why Shazam doesn't spot these mainstream pop hits early. It's not hard to recognize that Justin Bieber's song is called Love Yourself. Taylor Swift is very easily to recognize. So these are not artists that are necessarily going to require listeners to use Shazam to know who sings them and know the name of the songs. There's another batch of songs, though, that Shazam does not spot early for a very different reason. Songs like Wiz Khalifa's See You Again, Fetty Wap's 679 and Trap Queen, and The Weeknd's Earned It. Now, you might be looking at these songs and thinking, aha, Shazam does not predict hip-hop songs early. That's actually not what is important about these songs. You might be looking at The Weeknd's Earned It or See You Again and thinking, aha, Shazam does not spot songs in movies early. That's actually also not what is important about these songs. The key thing that these songs have in common, and the key reason that Shazam did not spot these songs early, were these were songs that broke first on streaming before they became big hits on radio. For some of them, like Fetty Wap's Trap Queen, it was the #1 most streamed song in 2015, but it was only the 36th most played song in 2015 on American radio. Same story for Fetty Wap's 679. It was number 11 in streaming, only the 61st biggest song in airplay in 2015. And even for songs like See You Again and Earned It, which had similar peaks in both streaming and airplay, they broke first on streaming. They were bigger on streaming before radio started exposing them. And you might ask, well, why would a song that's big on streaming not get a lot of Shazam traction? Well, if you think about streaming services, it makes sense. People Shazam a song because they want to know the artist and title of that song when a song piques their interest, but they don't know who sings it or they don't know the name of it. When you're using a streaming service, whether it is one of the platforms for listening to traditional FM radio online, or whether it's one of the pure play services, the artist and title information is right there on your phone screen to read it. You don't have to use a third-party app like Shazam to tell you the artist and title. So where are people using Shazam to learn the artist and title? Well, a variety of places. They could be out eating in a restaurant. They could be shopping. They could be at a nightclub, which explains why so many EDM and dance tracks show up early on Shazam. And they could be listening to your radio station. Now, I realize that a lot of your radio stations do transmit artist and title information over RDS or HD radio, and a lot of cars nowadays do have RDS on their displays, but I suspect that a lot of listeners simply aren't thinking about the fact that you can get that information on your car dashboard. I think listeners really aren't attuned to looking at the radio for artist and title information. And in some proprietary research we've done for specific clients here at Integrate Research, we have found that FM radio is indeed a major source of where people are hearing songs that they ultimately Shazam. One more thing I want to show you about the songs that Shazam spots early versus the songs that Shazam did not spot early. When you look at how long it takes those songs to reach Shazam's top 10, the songs that Shazam spotted early took 7.1 weeks on average to reach Shazam's top 10. In comparison, the songs that Shazam did not spot early, those songs took 7.5 weeks to reach Shazam's top 10. So a little bit slower, but really 7 weeks is kind of the sweet spot for reaching Shazam's top 10. How long did it take those songs to become top 10 hits on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, however? Well, for those songs that Shazam spotted early, it took 13.9 weeks on average for those songs to work their way up to the top 10 of the Hot 100 chart. In comparison, the songs that Shazam did not spot early, those only took 5.7 weeks to reach the Billboard Hot 100 chart's top 10. So in other words, Shazam isn't the real variable here. It's actually how long those songs become hits in general. And the reason I'm showing you this information is to show you that the songs that Shazam is really good at spotting early are those late bloomers, those songs that slowly take their time to move up the chart. And to emphasize that point, I want to take a look at now, where were songs charting on the Hot 100 when they reached Shazam's top 10? Is Shazam spotting songs out of nowhere, or is it spotting songs that were just a little bit slower moving their way up the chart than the typical song? Well, as we already noted, 44% of songs it's not early on. We've already looked at that. But for an amazing 46% of the rest of the songs that Shazam did actually spot early, they were charting at number 11 through number 30 on the Hot 100 chart. So when they first appeared in Shazam's top 10, they weren't coming out of nowhere. The vast majority of them were already in the top 30. They simply hadn't reached the top 10 yet. Another 10% were already on the Hot 100 chart, but they weren't in the top 30 yet. And none of them, 0 of the songs we examined, were not on the Hot 100 chart at all. So in other words, Shazam isn't spotting songs that are coming out of left field or coming out of nowhere. It's best at spotting those songs that are slowly working their way up the chart and helping you decipher if a song is number 21 or number 17, which songs are going to keep on climbing and ultimately become big hits versus those songs that are destined to be mid-pack performers forever. So now I want to take a look at, well, what about the other way? Are there songs that are top Billboard Hot 100 top 10 hits that Shazam misses? Well, it turns out that 83% of the songs that ever become Hot 100 top 10 hits were also top 10 at some point on Shazam. Not all of them were early, but most of them do reach Shazam. Only 17% of songs that ever go on to be top 10 hits on the Billboard Hot 100 never reach Shazam's top 10. Well, what are those songs that Shazam misses? Well, they're songs that were big on streaming. There's songs like T. Wayne's Nasty Freestyle, which was the 21st most streamed song in 2015, and Silento's Watch Me, which was the number 3 most streamed song in 2015. I'm convinced half of those streams came from my daughter's elementary school classmates. These were huge songs on streaming, but they were not among the top 75 most played songs on radio back in 2015. And to again remind why songs that are huge on streaming don't get traction on Shazam, if you want to hear Silento's Watch Me, you're going to have to know the artist and title, or at least one of them, and type that into to YouTube or type it into Spotify in order to hear the song. And even if it comes up on a YouTube or a Spotify playlist and you didn't specifically request it, again, that artist and title information is right there on the screen. So remember, the reason people use Shazam is not because they want to hear the song, but because somebody else played it for them and they want to know the artist and title and they don't have access to that information. So finally, let's take a look at, are there songs that are big on Shazam that never become big hits for radio? In other words, are there cases where Shazam can lead you astray? So far in this presentation, we've been looking at the 73% of songs that were top 10 hits on Shazam and also top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. But what about the rest of the songs that were on Shazam's top 10? Well, they're not stiff by and large. 13% of them didn't reach the top 10, but they did at least reach the top 20 on the Hot 100. Another 8% at least reached the top 30. Only 3% couldn't even reach the top 30, but at least made it on the Hot 100 chart. and a scant 3% never made the Hot 100 chart at all. So let's take a look first at, well, what are these songs that reached Shazam's top 10 but only reached the top 30 on the Hot 100 chart? Well, they're songs that were pretty big for some mainstream CHR stations. Songs like Ellie Goulding's On My Mind and Demi Lovato's Cool for the Summer. These may have not necessarily been power currents for your station, but there's a good chance they were at least secondary currents for your station. Well, what about those songs that failed to reach the top 30 but at least made it onto the Hot 100 chart? Well, those were songs that were not big for mainstream CHR stations, but at least were big in a specific format. Songs like Rich Homie Quan's Flex, Ooh Ah Ah, which was a big hit on urban radio, and Post Malone's White Iverson. These are songs that were big on urban or rhythmic CHR, but weren't necessarily relevant for mainstream CHR. Or Empire of the Sun's Walking on a Dream, which is an interesting song because it was originally done in 2008. It came back to life recently when it was in a Honda commercial, and is now having a second run on alternative radio, though it hasn't crossed over to the mainstream CHR universe. Finally, what about those songs that don't chart at all, that become top 10 hits on Shazam? Well, the good news is those are not songs you're probably going to want to consider for airplay on your radio station anyway. They're songs that caught listeners' attention with interesting lyrics like Macklemore, Ryan Lewis, and Ed Sheeran's Growing Up, which was an ode to parenting, or their album cuts like Alabama Shakes, Sound and Color. The good news is if a song like this ever does come along and you're thinking of playing it, these type of songs generally only stay top 10 in Shazam for a week. So there's really not a chance of you playing a stiff like these on your radio station. So we've thrown a lot of information at you in the last 25 minutes here, and I want to sum up our findings about Shazam by giving you 9 do's and don'ts for using Shazam to help you program your radio station. Do use Shazam to spot potential hits that are on the edges of your format. For mainstream CHR, Shazam is really good at spotting those EDM and dance tracks that are going to go on to be big hits. It's good at spotting songs that are sonically not in the pop mainstream. It's good at spotting crossover hits. Don't, however, rely on Shazam to predict mainstream hits by well-known artists. Shazam is not the best tool for telling you your listeners' appetite to hear Taylor Swift. Do use Shazam to see which new songs you're playing are sparking interest with your listeners. If you've got a handful of new songs that you've just added into rotation in the last couple of weeks and you see that some of them are getting a lot more Shazam action than others, well, you can use that information to help you decide that you're going to focus your energies and your spin counts on those titles. Don't, however, look to Shazam to tell you which songs listeners still love and want to hear today. Some of the biggest hits of 2015 dropped out of Shazam's top 10 super fast because, and you got to remember why people use Shazam in the first place, once listeners knew the artist and title of those songs, they no longer had a need to Shazam them. The best tool to actually determine which songs your audience most loves now and when your audience is tired of hearing those songs and is ready for you to move on to new current material remains custom market-specific new music research like we do here at Integrate. Do remember why listeners Shazam a song. To learn the artist and title. If you keep in mind that listeners are Shazamming songs because they pique their interest and they want to know who does them and they want to know what they're called, that will help you when making decisions about how to use Shazam more than anything else you can remember from this presentation. Don't, however, neglect other sources to find out about new hits, such as streaming. As you know, of course, radio has used a lot of different techniques to find out about how listeners are consuming music. You know, we've used sales data for decades and decades. But as fewer and fewer people actually buy songs, and as more and more people rent them from Spotify, streaming is becoming a bigger and bigger way that listeners are consuming music, and streaming is a way that listeners are not going to be interacting with Shazam. So if you're only using Shazam and neglecting streaming information, you're missing a portion of how listeners are consuming new music today. Do use Shazam to spot hits that are late bloomers. Shazam isn't necessarily going to help you spot hits completely out of left field or hits that are overnight sensations, but Shazam is really good at helping you spot those songs that are slowly moving their way up the charts that have the potential to go all the way. Don't use Shazam's future hits chart. Shazam, for some of you who may not know, Shazam publishes a future hits chart, and all that is the biggest songs on Shazam that have been released by the record company within the last few weeks. I think the cutoff date is 4 weeks. As we saw in our analysis, it generally takes songs longer to work their way up to the top 10, and if a record company releases a song but it doesn't really gain the public's consciousness until later on, the future hits chart is going to be misleading to you because of this arbitrary cutoff date. Use Shazam's standard charts instead when making your decisions. And finally, do remember that prominent radio exposure is proven to help make hits. Let's say that go back to that scenario where you've seen a couple of songs that are big on Shazam and that you added a few weeks ago. So you decided that you're going to really significantly increase your spin count on those songs. You're going to tell your air personalities to really play up the fact that these are hot new songs on your radio station. And after you've given it a lot more exposure and after you've had your air personalities help make those songs well known to your listeners, you get your next batch of new music research or call out, and lo and behold, that song moved from a the bottom third of your ranker report to being one of your top testing titles. Well, the question you have to ask yourself is, did Shazam predict that song would become a hit, or did the fact that your radio station introduced that song to your audience make that song a hit? You know, Shazam is a great tool for helping you predict some hits, but let's not forget that it's radio that makes hits. So that's our presentation. Katie, do we have any questions that people are burning to have answered about Shazam?
No, I haven't seen any questions come in. The only questions have been about the availability of the webinar after it's over. So I answered that.
And we are recording this webinar, and we will be putting it on integrateresearch.com, hopefully in the next day or so. So if you missed anything or if you just want to go back and review it, it will be available to you on integrateresearch.com, which I will put on the screen now so you can see it.
Oh, I'm seeing some questions come in now, Matt, if you have a few minutes.
Absolutely.
All right, so the first question is, have you checked to see if it makes any difference by format, i.e. country?
That is a great question. It is one of the big questions I knew we would get. For this particular analysis, we did not take a deep dive into specific formats, and country would be a big one that we'd really want to take a deep dive into. We are going to be releasing the findings of an analysis we did for the country format in a couple of another month or so. So stay peeled to integrateresearch.com for that study. But hopefully in the future we will take a deeper dive into country and how Shazam works for country.
All right, thanks, Matt. The next question is, is there any way to track where the Shazams are coming from, not by the city, but by a more specific location?
Shazam, so that's a good question, and the answer is kind of. Shazam does have some degree of granularity when you go to their app, and this is not something specific to radio. This is a feature that any Shazam user has. They have a map where you can go to, and you can, to some degree, in metropolitan areas with many different cities, you can break it down into certain segments. You can't necessarily dive by zip code, and I would actually discourage you from getting too granular with that information, because as you start getting too granular with the information, you're decreasing the number of Shazam users, or as we in the research business say, your sample size. And the fewer people you're looking at, the less reliable that information becomes. So you can get somewhat more granular on Shazam's app. The information that's on Mediabase is by Nielsen Audio Market, and really I would encourage people to just keep it at the Nielsen Audio Market level that you can get in Mediabase for examining this information, and so that you know that you have enough listeners to give you meaningful data. And I wouldn't ignore the national charts either.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. So the next question that you had was, do you know who the primary users of Shazam are? Do you have any information on that?
That is a fantastic question, and that is unfortunately something that we do not know, and that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because one of the challenges of using Shazam data is that you don't know where those Shazams are coming from. You don't know if these are people who listen to your radio station, because you don't necessarily have, listenership data on them. You don't know how old they are. You don't know their ethnicity, and you don't know really if they're in the target for the life group for your radio station. So that's where you have to be really discerning and ask yourself, is this a song that really I think has promise of being relevant to my audience because you don't know where their Shazams are coming from.
Okay, great. We had another question come in too. Do you have any data on the percentage of people who Shazam a song and then use the buy or streaming link once they're in Shazam?
That is another great question, and what they're referring to here is the fact that Shazam has been adding functionality, and that'll be something you'll want to watch in the future because as Shazam adds functionality, the way people use it may change in the coming years. For some songs, people can stream songs once they hear them on Shazam, and the idea has been, well, are people maybe using it to stream songs as opposed to just find out the artist and title? The short answer is no, we don't have information on that component of it. Anecdotally, I suspect that people are still primarily using Shazam because they want to know the artist and title of the song. Even if they go ahead to play it again, that may be true, but they're still using it to find out the artist and title. We have seen some market-specific research on how many people are using Shazam, and keeping in mind this is among specific radio audiences. And another thing to keep in mind is the vast majority of people are not actually actively using Shazam. So when you're looking at Shazam information, it's helpful, but it is coming from a minority of the audience.
Okay, and kind of on the same lines of that last question is there a way to tell if people are buying or streaming music after they discover it on Shazam?
Man, you guys are asking great questions. We don't have information on that. We don't have information specifically on the link between what people do with that information once they learn the artist and title. We don't know if they buy it. We don't know, at least we don't, if they're going to stream it. But it is a valuable question. I think it's fair to assume that people who Shazam a song at least have some level of positive interest. I mean, there may be a 1 in 1,000 case where a song is like, oh, that song is so bad, I want to know who does it. But probably the vast majority of the time people are Shazamming songs because they actually, do enjoy what they're hearing and they want to know more about it. But we don't have specific data on what they do with it afterwards.
Sure. All right, well, those are the only questions I have unless anybody has any last-minute ones they want to send in.